Chaffee to host our second annual grants workshop. We're also excited to partner once again with California Consulting. We want to thank them for being here and of course for the supervisor and his team and all the hard work that they have done to put this event together. That being said, we want to acknowledge some of the groups that are going to be attending today, and that will be some of our city council members, office representatives, and some of our local collaborative groups. There are many to list, and if we miss anybody, please understand. We also have joining us Orange County Business Council, Eli Home, Giving Children Hope, United Way OC, Okapica, Fullerton College, Cal State Fullerton, and many, many other nonprofit organizations who are here to learn to do a great job on grant writing. As we know, this has been an extremely difficult time with COVID-19, and we know it's even a tougher time for our nonprofits. So everything that you can learn today about making your applications not only strategic but successful, we wish you the best of luck from our team and the supervisors team. Have a great session.
Hi, I'm Doug Chaffee, your 4th District Supervisor. Thank you, Sharon, for co-hosting this second annual grant writing workshop. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it's important for you to be able to receive grants that you need to serve your communities. We're grateful today that California Consulting will be able to assist you with your grant writing endeavors. In fact, California Consulting has secured over $1.5 billion for its clients. My pleasure to introduce our presenters, Steve Samwellian and Ashley Ramsey from California Consulting. Steve founded California Consulting in 2004. The company quickly established a reputation for hard work, commitment to success for its clients, and is the largest premier grant writing firm in California. Steve has had an impressive 7-year career in government and the private sector. Couple this with his community involvement and you have an award-winning CEO. In fact, Steve has reserved several awards, including the LA County Business Federation Ambassador of the Year. Ashley has a Bachelor's of Science in Planning with an emphasis in regional and environmental policy and planning from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She has professional experience in healthcare administration, quality control, regulatory compliance, and early childhood education. Ashley also has experience in starting and operating an educational community service organization and a biotech firm. She uses her science and mathematics background to bring quantification and logic to grant proposals, yielding incredible success. Ashley loves learning the intricacies of projects and programs to form the basis of her persuasive narratives. Take it away, Steve and Ashley.
Thank you very much, everyone. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. This is Steve Samwellian at California Consulting. And I want to start by expressing our gratitude and profound and sincere thanks to Assemblywoman Quirk Silva, Supervisor Chaffee, and all of the staff that are involved in putting this together. I was a staff member for elected officials, several of them, and I know the hard work, diligence, and determination that goes into organizing something of this magnitude. And so my hat's off to you for putting this together. Thank you for the kind invitation at California Consulting. So I'm going to begin with just a very quick overview. First, I'm going to talk about some grants that are available currently, October 2020, and then get into a broad overview, very broad overview, kind of flying at 30,000 feet, so to speak, about grants. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who's going to walk us through a more detailed, comprehensive, tangible explanation of each of the facets and components of grant writing. So I'll start by saying, I know we're going to have questions, but remember this part, all of your easy, simple questions that you have, I want you to ask those of me. So the simplest, easy questions like what is a grant or, what's the deadline of this? I want you to ask those for me. Your most challenging, intricate questions, save all of those up, and those are the ones that go to Ashley. Those are the ones we want to ask Ashley when it's her turn to talk, and she'll do great. She'll do fantastic. We're fortunate to have her as part of our team. So as Supervisor Chaffee and Assemblywoman Quirk Silva mentioned, just a quick background, a primer on California Consulting. We've been around for 16 years. We have 26 grant writers. We're the largest grant writing firm in the state. We brought in over $1.5 billion, billion with a B, since we opened, and we write grants for cities, school districts, nonprofits, universities, community colleges, all across California. And we're very honored to have the supervisor and the Assemblywoman hosting this. So what types of grants do we write? What I did is that I just made a few notes as a snapshot. If you're working in the grant world today, October 2020, what would be on the radar screen? And there are a lot of grants, but I can tell you just the 3, 4, 5, 6 that are the most popular. So we just submitted, and Ashley and her team that she supervises are very familiar with this. We just submitted a number of ATP grants, Active Transportation Program grants, which is a grant through Caltrans that funds streets and roads and flashing crosswalks and flashing stop signs and street signals and all kinds of things like that. We are about to submit a group of HSIP grants, Highway Safety Improvement Program grants. Those are also Caltrans grants. Those are due very soon. They're mostly for cities. Those grants also fund transportation infrastructure. We're working on EDA grants, Economic Development Administration. That's a federal grant for on-site and off-site improvements for federal money for infrastructure. So for business parks, industrial parks, any types of projects that require on-site and off-site improvements. We're also gearing up for the Prop 1, which is a big state grant that'll be due out soon. Prop 1 is for stormwater, flood control, wastewater, anything in the water realm can be funded through Prop 1. And if you're in the education sector, which I saw the RCP list, and there are some folks in the education sector on this list, there is a very popular grant we wrote last year, had a lot of success with it, called the Homeless Children Grant, which funds school districts who have homeless populations. And I'm hard pressed to find a school district that doesn't have a homeless issue in California. Just about every district, even some of the most affluent districts, you'd least suspect it, unfortunately, do have homeless children, homeless students. So that's a big grant. We're writing it right now for our school district clients. And I could go through a whole litany of different grants we're writing for our school districts, but I just wanted to highlight that one. And then the last one I want to emphasize is there's a Prop 68 available right now. That's an $8.5 million grant with no match, so zero match, and that's for parks and recreation. And that's for cities, park districts, community service districts. $8.5 million for parks and rec. You can fund restrooms, you can fund lights at parks, playground equipment, trails, outdoor amphitheaters, shade structures, anything outdoor, park and rec related. $8.5 million, no match. That's due in December, in the middle of December. So that's a very quick snapshot of what is available today in the grant world. It's not a comprehensive list. There's a lot more out there. But at California Consulting, Ashley and Danielle Sotelo, her colleague, and their team, that's what they're writing right now for our clients. So I'm going to quickly go through the types of grants that are available, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. So there's federal grants. Probably most of you on this Zoom know what federal grants are. U.S. Department of Justice. They could be Department Bureau of Reclamation, anything that's federal grants related. They tend to be larger. They tend to be more complex applications, more intricate applications. They tend to be larger grant amounts. They also tend to be more competitive because you're competing nationwide. Those are the grants that we give to our most senior grant writers, just to be candid and to be frank, because those are 100-page, 120-page, 150-page applications, and then a whole bunch of attachments, sometimes double-sided 100 pages, believe it or not. The second type of grant that's out there are state grants, state of California grants. The state of California grants are also pretty complex. There was a time 16 years ago when we opened the company when we used to internally kind of say, well, the state grants aren't as tough as the federal grants. I can tell you the state grants have caught up really quick with the federal grants. They also are very complex. They also can be 75, 100 pages long. They've also become extremely competitive. The Prop 68 I mentioned earlier, the Parks grant, last year in 2019, they funded less than 10% of the applications. That means 90% were declined. So when I say federal grants are competitive, the state grants are right there with them as far as competition level, if it's a worthwhile grant. The third type of grant that we write is we write private foundation grants. What are private foundation grants? That's Wells Fargo Foundation, Honda Foundation, Northrop Grumman Foundation, any corporation that you can think of, Citibank, Bank of America, any corporation you can think of probably has a private foundation grant. Walmart, Target, also California Community Foundation, California Endowment. Those are both based in Los Angeles and downtown LA. Those are two very large foundations. And then there's Annenberg Foundation, and down in Orange County, where many of you I know are from, there's Amundsen Foundation, very prominent foundation. So we write foundation grants. And then the fourth and final grant, we categorize, for lack of a better term, as local grants. Well, what's a local grant? A local grant is like AQMD, South Coast AQMD, or SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments, or your local COG, or your county. Orange County gives out grants. So those are not federal grants. They're not state grants. They're not private foundation grants. SCAG is not a private foundation. A COG is not a private foundation. They're quasi-governmental entities. So we categorize those as local grants in nature. So those are the four types of grants that we write. For many of you on this call, that was probably a review. You probably already knew all that, but I thought that was a good place to start, just to outline the four different types of grants. I also saw the list, and there are a tremendous number of nonprofits on this call. Ashley's going to talk about nonprofits and best practices for nonprofit funding. I suspect that's going to be of high interest to the attendees. We have written a lot of grants for nonprofits. We're writing several grants for community colleges right now and universities, and we'll touch on that as we get into the call. So we're going to talk about finding grants. We're going to talk about after you find them, writing them, after you write them, the post-award compliance, the reporting and the administration. And then after we talk about all of that, we're going to go into questions. So at this juncture, what I'd like to do is introduce our senior grant director, Ashley Ramsey. She has tremendous qualifications. She's written more grant awards than I can count at the federal level, state level, private foundation level, local level, for all types of projects. And so you are definitely in good hands with Ashley. I'll be stay on the Zoom as well. Ashley, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to jump right in to our presentation. Shasta, can you enable me to share my screen? Because what we'll do is we'll go through a brief PowerPoint presentation, and I'm also going to jump around and do some demonstrations for you so that you can see how to find the grants and kind of see some examples of the information that you'll need in order to write a successful grant application. And this is not just if you're going to be writing these applications yourself. If you partner with a professional grant writing team, this information will be very important for you to know to be able to create the right working environment with your professional team, such as we here at California Consulting, that can help you guide through the process and get the most competitive application. Because no matter what the writing is like, if you don't do gather the right letters, gather the right support, do the right planning, you may not end up being competitive. So the writing, of course, is very important so that you can express that, but you also have to do a lot of other work in a grant. It's not just filling out an application, it's really the full process, following best practices in your full process of planning and development of your project or program for the extent of the project. So here, I just wanted to identify a presentation goal, and that's for me to teach you how to obtain federal, state, and private funding for your special projects. And so those could be infrastructure projects, or they could be ongoing programming, or they could be a new program. Ongoing programs are a little harder to fund, and we're going to talk about that later, but a lot of interest and funds are available for brand new programs, brand new projects, and infrastructure. And with the COVID-19 pandemic looming over all of us still, funding is opening up for ongoing programming, which I know is going to be important to a lot of you who are on the call today. The one very important thing to keep in mind is that you need to match the funding stream with your proposal. So if you are trying to fund a ballet, you do not want to request funding for an after-school program unless your program is for people who are after school to put on a community ballet. You want to make sure that the grant's objectives and goals match your objectives and goals. And when you have that alignment, there's a nexus of your intent and the grant's intent, then you are optimally competitive. Okay, so how do we find grants? We talked about the different kinds of grants. How do we find them? Well, first you need to do a little introspection. You need to find out what's the purpose of our project and what are we going to be doing? Are we looking to fund our whole organization because we need to get a new organization going to fill a need in the community? Or are we looking to fill a gap in the services that we provide? How much are we going to present in this proposal? How much are we allowed to present in the proposal is going to come later. But if you don't know what you want to fund, are we going to start a program for 20 kids to attend? Are we going to start a new park from scratch that's going to span 5 acres? What is it that you're trying to get funded here? The clearer you can be at the beginning, when you identify your program or project, then the better you're going to be able to identify matching funding opportunities. Again, find out what your goals are. Be clear about them. What's the point of the goal? You can do a little bit of mixing and matching once you find an opportunity that's kind of going to fit, but the clearer you are at the outset, the better things are going to go later on. Identify your objectives. What is it that you're going to obtain? And make sure that those objectives are also measurable. So we talk a lot about SMART goals, SMART objectives. We want them to be something that's measurable and that we'll be able to say, this is what we're going to accomplish, and then to measure that after the grant has been awarded and report back on it. Because, a lot of the times we think of grants as something you apply for and then you get the money. But in most cases, in almost all cases, the grant is going to come with conditions, and those conditions involve reporting, showing that you've accomplished what you set out to accomplish. And so you want to know, like, if we're having 20 kids, that's one of our goals. We want to touch the lives of 20 kids. We want to hit some kind of metric with those 20 kids. Know on the outset what it is that you're capable of doing, so that we can make sure that we can deliver a project that fits the grant's needs. Now it's time to find your funding sources. So how do we find the funding sources? There's computerized databases that are available for a fee. You could become a member of those. There are also some databases that are free. California Consulting is a member of a lot of different database searches that we utilize to identify the hundreds of grants that we keep in our sites that we can offer to people. And we can search those for you. If you need help, call us and we'll find them. California Consulting also produces a list of ongoing open grant opportunities and upcoming grant opportunities that might work for your organization or work for a municipality. Foundation centers, you can go directly to a foundation if you know which one it is. So let's say you want to apply for the State Farm Good Neighbors opportunity, where you can go directly to their website and find that. You could Google it, and that actually produces a lot of great opportunities too. But for public grants, federal, state, and local grants, I'm going to actually walk you through trying to find a grant. So now I am going to switch us over to Internet Explorer. I know that's outdated, guys, but it actually works best on grants.gov to use Internet Explorer, which is free if you use Windows. I think it's actually free if you use other operating systems as well. So grants.gov, you can search it with any browser, but it does work best under Internet Explorer, because if you see a grant that you want to apply for, you would need to apply using Internet Explorer. So this portal, grants.gov, which I hope you're able to see on your screens now, it is a search engine, and it's also the portal to submit any federal grants. unless otherwise noted in their guidelines, but there's been a lot of emphasis recently to utilize that portal for all the different departments. So the Department of Justice, the EPA, the National Endowment for the Arts, um, Housing and Human, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development. They're all going to be on here. So in grant opportunities, there's actually a search bar here at the top of grants.gov, and we'll just put in an example. Let's put in after school. We don't want aftermath.
Ashley,
Yes.
Steve, just quickly to interrupt you. I know you're a master at grants.gov, but just a quick tutorial for everybody on the call. So as Ashley mentioned, I want to reiterate, grants.gov is really the site for federal grants. To find federal grants, there is no better place to go than grants.gov. And then to submit your federal grant, as Ashley noted, just about every single federal grant in the universe of federal grants has to be submitted through grants.gov. And Ashley is going to give you an expert tutorial on SAMs and DUNS numbers and how to submit. But just please note, grants.gov is important.
Yeah,
if you're in the grant, if you're in the grant world, you should be familiar with grants.gov. If you're not, hopefully I'm sure after today you will be. So sorry to interrupt you, Ashley.
Oh, no, thanks so much for jumping in and adding that. After school with a hyphen didn't yield great results. What we can see is that there's only 2 grants that are posted right now. You'll be able to see the opportunity number, which isn't that informative for our purposes, but we have a great opportunity title that usually is very informative, the agency that's granting that, its status, which right now we've got filtered for posted or forecasted. You can see on this left-hand column, we have a lot of different filters that we can apply. We've got the posted date and the close date. So that close date, of course, is the due date. Here you can see that this is a call for partnership concept papers, and it's specific to the Middle East and North Africa. So if your program is not likely to be in the Middle East or North Africa, then this grant is probably not going to fit for you. Let's do another search. I kind of did one earlier for performing arts. And you can do this search over here in the left bar. You don't have to go back up to the top. So this search now yields 237 matching opportunities. That's a lot to go through. So you can even come through here on the left and filter down more if we only want grants versus cooperative agreements. Cooperative agreements are more like a contract, not so much a procurement contract, but more like a services contract. So we want to sort only for grants. There's 133 of those. And there's actually one of my favorites is this eligibility search, because if you are a nonprofit, you don't necessarily want to go through all the things that are only available to municipalities or school districts. So you could click nonprofits having 501c3 status, and that shows you the 26 opportunities that are available to you. You can filter even further if you like. So now let's see if you've got something that catches your eye, like the, this one's not the one I was hoping to see, which hasn't been opened yet, which would be the NEA's annual, like really big solicitation for community arts programs. But this one is the Arts and Artifacts Domestic Indemnity Program. And so if you click on that, you'll come to this summary page, which is where you can apply. You could also subscribe to get notices if it's been extended, etc. This one's due December 14th. You'll see that the maximum you can request is 100,000. That's your award ceiling. And the minimum you can request is 10,000. So if you're only looking for $1,000 to help with something, this is not the right grant. You'd have to ask for 10,000 in order, a minimum of 10,000 in order to go here. And I want to call out another interesting fact here, and that is the cost sharing or matching requirement. In a lot of grants, whether it's required or not, you can get extra points for leveraging your skills, your other funding, to amplify the impact of the grant money. In some cases, this is an actual requirement. And so, like for instance, in the EDA's grants that are designed to spur job growth in an area through infrastructure or programmatic means, those EDA grants will require a 50% cost match. So that means if you're asking for $1 million, you also have to provide $1 million. Or if your program costs $2 million, then you'd have to provide 1 million of that. In this case, there's no cost share or cost match, but I do want to urge you to consider ways that you are amplifying the impact of those grant monies. So whether that's by your professional expertise or volunteer hours, donations that you're going to be leveraging, or if it's actual cash. So consider all of those things when you think about what is your match and what is your cost share. We'll go into that a little more later too. So as you scroll down, you'll also see who are the eligible applicants. These are the people you would be competing against. So first you check, am I eligible to apply? And then you kind of see who else is going to be applying for these grants as well. And you've got various degrees of description in these on grants.gov, but you'll always have a link to additional information. In this case, the NEA always has a really detailed website announcement. So there's sometimes additional information on those web pages. So here it has the link. Unfortunately, it's not working at this time. You may have to check back another time if this is a grant that you're interested in. So this one didn't give us a lot of information about what it really means to have this Arts and Artifact Domestic Indemnity Program, but you can come over here and see if the grants package is included on related documents, and they don't have that attached either. There's the synopsis history, which is just this description here. This write-up is the synopsis that they're speaking of. And then the package is the forms that you would have to fill out to apply for the grant. You can continue to search however you like, play around on grants.gov, and become familiar with it so that you're grant ready. Don't just wait until you urgently need the money, unless you're already in that situation. That's okay. You know, the best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago, but the next best time is now. But do start playing around in grants.gov and become familiar with it so you can be alert to opportunities that arise that might fit your needs. Try lots of different search criteria. Try looking at departments that you know align with your organization's goals and missions. So I also wanted to talk about a brand new portal that's for California. California used to be, and still is to some extent, and their state offerings they were not unified. Recently, the new California Grants portal launched, and that is grants.ca.gov. I have not found yet any discrepancies among web browsers. It seems to work fine for me on all web browsers. So here you could play around. This is supposed to be where all state administered grants are listed. So if it's parks through OGALS, or if it's parks through California Natural Resources Agency, or if it's the Department of Education or the Energy Commission, all of these are supposed to be here. In the past, you used to have to go to each department's website to find all of the opportunities, and now they're in the process of centralizing them into this database. And they also even have this really user-friendly way of searching by saying, you know, what applicant type do you want to look for? Well, let's stick to our nonprofit example. And I think it's probably best at this time here to say any grant category, and then any time frame. Let's say something that's due within just the next 3 months, and we're going to show opportunities. So this is forecasted and active opportunities. Here you can also filter the results. But we have 3 results that showed up right now. And well, although this is a rather large grant, I'm going to jump in here and show you the AHSC, and that's a housing grant related to transportation, affordable housing and sustainable communities grant. So this has a similar summary, but obviously in a different format because this is California's portal. And it has a great description of what this grant is trying to do, its history, and what kinds of projects it's going to fund, and who's eligible. So it also has a description about the geographic distribution of funds, and what the matching requirement is. On the right-hand side, you'll see the amount of awards that they anticipate funding, if a letter of intent is required, and let's jump into it just briefly. And that is to say that you're intending to apply. So it's usually just a very brief letter or a summary on a form that is provided by the grantor saying, here's a very brief summary of what your project is, how much that you're going to ask for approximately, just to give them an idea that you are going to apply. In some cases, this letter of intent is required, and then you have to be invited to another grant to be able to submit the full application. In other cases, they just want to have that letter of intent before you apply. In some cases, a letter of intent is not required, but it's acceptable. And in those cases, I recommend that you do go ahead and send the letter of intent unless the deadline for those has passed. And if the deadline for a letter of intent has passed and it is a requirement, then unfortunately, you will not be eligible to apply for that grant. So even though there is even though there's an actual deadline for the application that's much later for that full application, in this case, like if you did not make the letter of intent deadline, then you would not be eligible to apply. So that's the California website. And then I just wanted to show you that locally, I did a Google search initially and said Ventura County grants, and was able to find this Rapid Response Fund. Many of you probably know that the business assistance grants have already closed, but this is just kind of an example of what a local grant search would look like. And let me show you a foundation. This is State Farm. And so here you want to make sure that you're going to the actual foundation or the actual agency's website. So that statefarm.com is their actual verified website. And you can see they've got two different types of grants here. So these are just some ways that you can identify those grants. You can go into your company grants and just follow this information, find the same stuff. Who's eligible? What can you apply for? What are their intents? Here they have some safety grants, but they also have community development grants and education grants. So, in these, you want to make sure that what you're applying for fits their intent. If you do not fit their intent, you're not going to be competitive.
Ashley?
Can you guys still hear me?
Ashley?
Yes, Steve.
I want to just interject for a quick second. So a few of the pitfalls that I've seen over the years, having done this now 16 years, of being grant ready. I won't call these horror stories. I'll just call them, facts of what we've seen. So one thing is being grant ready is always, as you mentioned, checking the match requirement. You want to check what the match requirement is before you start to apply. If the match requirement you can't meet it, you need to know about that before you start the application. Sometimes we've had clients that have called us, they're 50, 60, 70% through with the application, and they call us and say, we just discovered there's this match requirement. We found you online. We wanted to call you. Can you help us? And we say, we can't. The match requirement is part of the criteria of the grant. There's nothing we can do about it. If you don't have the match, you shouldn't apply. A second issue we run into, more so in the past, not as much recently, because people have become familiar with grants.gov, is an agency will start an application, begin to write it, and they think they have their grants.gov registration. I know Ashley's going to go into how to do the grants.gov registration, not in detail, but just briefly. And they don't have their grants.gov registration. They don't have their SAMS registration. They don't have their DUNS number. And we feel bad for them. We feel sad for them because, they've spent 50, 75, 100 hours writing this grant. And then they call us and say, hey, we've got it done. It's almost ready to go. We're trying to submit it through grants.gov and we're having a problem. And we say, well, you need to look at your grants.gov registration before you started the application, not when you were 70% or 80% or 90% through with it. And then the third issue we run into with some folks who call us, because we get these calls. They're not clients of ours. They just call us. They find us online. They say, hey, you're professional grant writers who ran into this stumbling block. Can you help us out? One of the third things we run into is the post-award compliance and the administration. They don't know what they're signing up for. So they're writing a grant, they write it, they get it, it's submitted, it's funded, they celebrate, and then they get a letter that says you have 48 months or 36 months of post-award compliance and reporting you have to do. And the agencies will call us and say, we're not a client of yours, we haven't hired you, but we didn't know there was all this post-award compliance and reporting we had to do. We thought we'd get the check, we'll get the award, and we're happy. So those are three of the things we see. Those are three of the phone calls we get. The third one happens pretty frequently, where agencies call us and say, we wrote it in-house, we didn't hire you, we did it ourselves, we got the award. Now we just realized there's 36 months of reporting. Can we farm that out to you? Can we contract it out to you? Can you do the reporting? And we say, yeah, sure we can. But obviously it would have been great if you as an agency knew before you started to write the grant that should you be awarded, you would have to do this reporting. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to mention just three pitfalls that I know our team, Danielle, Sotelo, and Ashley are our two grant leaders. I know they and the whole team they oversee statewide. They can tell you a number of stories about those instances where we get those phone calls.
Yeah, and that's where, thank you so much for adding that. And that's where setting those measurable goals at the beginning comes into play, because whether 4 years goes by and then you have to go back retroactively and find those metrics before you knew what happened, or whether from the outset, those you are probably going to have to do some kind of reporting. So just keep in mind, you are going to have some kind of post-award compliance, whether that's a little summary of what impact you had, in which case it's great to have anecdotal evidence, little stories from your program or project that are meaningful to the people who were able to help you fund that project or program, or whether those are hard measured data from users. The grant may have some requirements they will have some requirements about post-award compliance. So learn that while you're writing your grant, include that in your grant. That way you can always come back. I always write in, what are the impacts going to be and how are we going to measure that? So, it's one thing to say, hey, we're gonna reduce greenhouse gas emissions and we're going to capture carbon. But it's a different thing to say, we're going to plant 15 coastal live oaks, and they are going to sequester this many tons of CO2 over the course of their 40-year lifetime. Or, whatever it is, if you get more specific, you quantify if you can, it makes it easier to say, we had a success. Here's what we plan to do, and then we delivered it. So that's exactly what post-award compliance is about. Consider that as you write your grant. A grant will become an opportunity for you to remind yourself, what was it we were going to do? How are we going to measure that? You can always go back to that written grant and find out what you were supposed to be doing. So here's some other places to locate grants. If you needed to go, instead of going to grants.gov, you could also check periodically at the departments that offer grants, whether it's a state department or if it is a federal department. Those are some examples.
So I think both of my headphones have gone now. Is everybody still hearing me? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, my inboard microphones, I need to do some technology, so I need to do some maintenance on them. But so hopefully everybody still hears me okay. So this is a great diagram I like of the grant process, because it shows you the cyclical nature of drafting, of planning your project, going back and revising your project, going back and revising your proposals. So as you know, we talked a lot about grant readiness. Identify that needs and focus. Whether you have a grant identified or not, you want to know what it is that you want to do. So then you go out and look for that grant. You're better poised for success if you do it that way. Some people see a grant come across and they're like, oh, hey, I have always wanted to recycle glass into a post-consumer good. Great for you. It's probably a little late in the game for you to develop a company that recycles glass into post-consumer goods. If you find a grant that's open right now, but not impossible, depending on where you are. So you can find those prospective grants that are going to match your needs. And again, that match is so important. Make sure there's an alignment between your intent and the grant's intents. So make sure that you develop your proposal and your budget. The budget is important. There's going to be a maximum award amount. There's going to be a minimum award amount in some circumstances. And you want to make sure that if your grant has a match, of course you have that match, but you also want to make sure that you're going to be able to deliver what you say you're going to be delivering in the budget that you have allowed. Make sure it's something that you can accomplish. That's very important. So I recently have had some rewrites on grants that cities have done before they came to us, and they said, hey, we thought it was going to cost $700,000 to put this trail in, and all of the bids came back at 1.5 million. So that's half as much as they really needed. You need to get really drill down, be really realistic about what you need in order to accomplish your goals and what it is you need to deliver your project or your program. So those two, your proposal and your budget, need to align with each other. If you say you're going to provide laptops in a library, and you're going to provide 7 laptops, you want to make sure that your budget is for, includes 7 laptops. You don't want to say you're going to include 7 laptops and then you've got the software and you've got installation fees, but you don't have the laptops. So if you are going for installation and software, make sure that that's your proposal. You want to make sure that the focus of your proposal, your budget, your timeline, that they all line up. We talked about the letter of intent or letter of inquiry earlier. That is not always applicable, and that's why that's here in dashed lines instead of solid ones. So sometimes you just go straight into that specific proposal. For me, it's most of the time, but oops, sorry guys, getting ahead of myself. So then you want to make sure that you're well aware of the deadline. In these cases, these days recently, deadlines have been changing. Sometimes it's been earlier, not often. And other times it keeps getting pushed further back and further back to accommodate the challenges that people are facing in the pandemic right now. Whatever that deadline is, you want to make sure that you are planning to work on this grant at least for several weeks or a couple of months before it's due, if possible. If you only have a couple of days, you want to make sure that you leave space for the actual submission. Know if your submission is a postmark deadline. Know if it's an online deadline. Know if you're in a portal, you want to make sure that you leave enough space to deal with any technical problems that come up. So in that vein, I recommend that you plan to submit a week before the deadline, if that's at all possible. And if it's not possible, still plan to submit at least 2 or 3 days before that deadline. That way you can address any problems that come up in a final review of your application before submission, or any problems that come up with the actual submission process. So after you submit a proposal, what happens? Well, the agency reviews the proposal, usually with a couple of readers that are scoring your application and then comparing it to the other people who have applied scores. In some cases, there's a threshold of points, and you want to get to that threshold of points, and then everybody over that threshold gets funded. In other cases, you're ranked against other people, and they basically draw a line when they run out of money. If you're above the line, you get funded, and if you aren't, then you may be considered in the next round, or you may have to, in most cases, you have to apply again or look for other sources of funding. After that review, you will receive your award letter, or a denial, or you just aren't notified that you're awarded, and a lot of the times that's how you know that you were not selected for that award. If you are offered an award, you then need to go into kind of a contracting process. You have to decide, are we going to accept or decline that award? And a lot of that, this is an excellent time to look at that post-award compliance. Do you have the capacity? If you didn't already evaluate, if you have the capacity to do the post-award compliance, make sure that you do that now. Don't accept the money if you don't feel like you can deliver on the requirements, because that might reflect poorly on you when you apply for other grants in the future. Then you want to do your project. Make sure when you're doing your budget and your timeline, your proposal, that you pick feasible amounts of time. Like if it takes you 3 months to do a bid process, or your purchasing is going to take 6 months because the shipping is construction and or manufacture and shipping is extensive, you want to make sure that you build that time frame into your timeline, because whatever you have set out as your budget, as your timeline in that grant, it sets the bar for your award, and it becomes the measuring stick for how well you've done. You want to be able to always deliver your projects within the budget allowed and in the timeline that you've provided. So don't get outrageous, be realistic, but make sure that you give yourself enough space to deliver the project that you want to provide, that the grantors have funded in the time frame that you have expressed that you're going to do that. So build in a little bit of contingency if the grant allows it. And then you do that post-award compliance with filing reports. Your successes in grants are going to feed additional successes. So as you become experienced with winning grants, that's excellent. Now you've won some grants, but you most importantly want to become experienced in a good delivery of your project. That's why I say this is not just about filling out an application form or writing a story. We're really about adopting excellent project management, planning, and implementation, follow-up. It's all feeds into your grant application. So while we're writing the proposal, now we've picked our grant, we've selected the grant that we're going to apply for, and it fits our needs. Then you want to figure out, are we going to do this all in-house? Are we going to hire a professional to do this with us? Are we going to work as a big team? The more partners you have right now, usually the better. As long as everybody can work cohesively and you don't get this giant project that's like not going to be able to be implemented well. But as you pull in other outside organizations, it helps everybody to get better. And it's very popular right now among grants to have some really strong, clear partnerships where you bring in the expertise of multiple agencies to deliver the best projects and the best programs to your community. So figure out, are you going to do this in-house? Are you going to have a professional write the whole thing with you just providing guidance on what it is? Are you wanting the professional grant writers to just review your proposal that you write? Because if you go ahead and start writing your proposal 3 months out and you give another couple of weeks, a grant writer can make revisions and suggest changes a couple weeks out. That way you have time to make any additional changes to your program or project and your narrative so that you can be most competitive. So that can be an option if you aren't able to have a grant writer do your whole grant for you, but you want to have some of that expertise that comes with our experience and our success, then we can do a revision or a review with suggestions. That's something that we do at California Consulting. As you draft your proposal, you want to make sure, again, this is so important, that you project what your outcomes are and that they are measurable and that they are realistic. So it's really tempting to write a proposal that says, oh, we're going to improve people's lives in this way, but you want to get really specific in what way you're going to do it and make sure that it's something that can be measured. So it doesn't have to necessarily be something where a statistic is going to measure it right away in the short term, but it can't. Think about other ways that you can measure too, like surveys, interviews. There are qualitative measurements that can be made in addition to the quantitative things like the statistics. So let's say you were doing a sports activity for kids and the purpose was to reduce childhood obesity rates in your community. In the first round of this program, you're not you're probably not going to have a major impact on the obesity rates in your community, within just 6 months. But you will have had a certain number of children that participated. You could probably count, pick an exercise. How many push-ups can they do when they enter versus how many push-ups can they do when they exit? And you can also get stories from them. So when they are participating in sports, they're not only developing their body, they're also developing their confidence, they're developing interpersonal relationships. So think about those other benefits that are secondary to your intent, your first goal, and measure those too. So capture a story from one of those children. If you have consent from their parent, like have a written interview with them or record a video. In some cases, a video response is allowed. But as you're drafting your narrative, you want to think about what can we feasibly do. Like if a survey is just not going to work, don't say that you're going to do a survey. If you are going to impact those obesity rates in the future, make sure that you're measuring like your short-term goals. And if there is a long-term reporting period, then you want to also note where you're going to get the statistics to be able to measure those long-term goals, those long-term reductions in those childhood obesity rates in this example. We talked also about the timeline that includes planning and, coming up with matching funds if that's necessary. It's definitely best if you have those matching funds committed in the application. In most cases, that's going to be a requirement. Where do you find these requirements? Actually, I'm going to tell you real quick that it's in the guidelines. So there will be guidelines posted on the websites. We weren't able to find them in the example we looked for on grants.gov because they weren't available there, but in most circumstances, we would find those. So you'd find the application instructions or the NOFO, which means Notice of Funding Opportunity, or the RFA, Request for Applications. Those are all terms that would often lead you to those guidelines, and that's where you're going to find the instructions. So if you hire a grant writer, they'll have those for you already. They'll be very thoroughly familiar with these documents, which range in length from probably about 4 pages to, I've had one that was like 93 pages of instructions before. So you definitely want to make sure as you're drafting that you're connecting with those guidelines. And also one of the first things that you're going to be doing as you work with your grant writer or with yourself, we talked about partnerships earlier. Not only do you have to say, these are my partners, they need to say they're partners with you too. So letters of agreement and memorandum of understanding are important to help prove that those partnerships really do exist and to indicate what each party is bringing to that project or program. As you're writing your proposal, you want to make sure that you keep it as short as possible to convey your thoughts. So you don't want to just go on and on just to be able to write something. If you can make your point and make your persuasive argument in a few sentences, well, it depends, on what space you have, but you want to make sure that you make your point and then you move on. You answer the questions and you move on. You don't have to extend the description just to take up space. Longer is not better in a grant application. You want to make sure you stay within your allowable space, and you want to make sure that you give sufficient detail to be competitive, but you don't want to just ramble on. The reviewers are not interested in reading stuff that doesn't add value. So make sure that you keep to a concise narrative, a reasonable budget, make sure they stay aligned and stay on those guidelines. I make a checklist with internal deadlines that include all the documents that are needed when I do a grant application. So that helps me keep moving on all of my applications. So I don't just wait until the last minute, because I'm prone to do that kind of thing if I don't have those structures. So over time, I've spread things out a little more, been a little front heavy on things like letters, things where you have to reach out to other people and depend on other people. Do those at the beginning. Before you even get started, Steve kind of spoiled this. His spoiler alert, Steve. You got to say spoiler alert next time, okay? But before you start your application for a federal grant or federal funding that is coming through a state department, You want to make sure that you have your EIN number available, which is also called a federal ID number, an employer ID number, taxpayer ID number. Um, that ID is going to be necessary in most of your applications. If you don't have one yet, you can apply for one through the IRS. The DUNS number is established as a identifier for your organization. A lot of times, if you have a big organization, you'll have a DUNS number for every site. Make sure that you're picking the right DUNS number for you. If you don't have a DUNS number, you can request one. I usually how to get to that site. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I've been talking so much. I apologize. So DUNS is on duns.com. It's Duns and Bradstreet. It is free. You should never have to pay for a DUNS number. You can look up your own DUNS number. They'll email it to you. You probably, like I said, if you're a big organization, you have a main DUNS number and then you have individual DUNS numbers. So make sure that you pick the one that's most appropriate to you. They usually are associated with your different accounts. So if you are a municipality, you'll have an administrative one that's overarching, and maybe that's usually the most appropriate one for you. But if you wanted to have parks application get funded directly into your bank account for your parks department, you use your parks department DUNS number. That's how you pick that. Once you have a DUNS number, you can apply for a SAM registration. SAM is also free. It's sam.gov, sam.gov. And you can set up a login and set up your entity. If your entity is already set up, you can change the administrator if there's been a change in people. If you're good, that's great. You do need to re-register for SAM once a year. So your SAM registration is good for a year. If it's just a renewal, it's a quick thing. If you don't have a DUNS number, you need to allot about 3 months to be able to get your DUNS and your SAM in place. If you got a DUNS but not a SAM, you're looking at probably 1 month. And grants.gov is pretty fast, but you can't really connect your grants.gov to be fully active until you have your SAM in place. So that's the kind of the order that you're going to go in: an EIN, a DUNS, a SAM, and then your grants.gov. The ORI here is listed as an example because there are some agencies that have their own grant portals. So for USDOJ, actually don't submit most of their grants through grants.gov. They have their own portal called ORI. And it's a very simple process, but in the guidelines, they'll have additional instructions for what's the other step that you have to do. After you've got grants.gov, then you have to do ORI as well. So the narrative usually has several different components. You want to express what the need. So we've talked a lot about what you're going to do. Now we also need in the narrative talk about why we need to do it. So this is where we say, okay, back to our example about childhood obesity. This is where you bring in your statistics of your current childhood obesity rates. This is where you talk about some of the health concerns that are impacting youth in your area. And so how do you know that? Sometimes you go to the health department and you can get that information. And sometimes you can talk to your own students or your own clientele and find out what is it that are your needs? What are the needs that are not being met? And you can also go to scientific journals and you can go to news articles to find out what is impacting you. But the more local you stay to the people that you're going to impact, the more compelling it is. And your grant writer can walk you through that too if you are going to have a grant writer work with you. So you want to really express, this is where we do our bleeding heart stories, and it's sometimes really hard to talk about our shortcomings, but if you don't have a need, you don't really have a reason to get the funding or the project. So here you want to say, here's where we have some needs that aren't being met. So swallow any pride, talk about what it is that we really need to be able to be successful in whatever it is that your organization is. So the approach part of the narrative will talk about what it is that you're going to do. We sometimes also call this a scope of work. This is the step-by-step. How are we going to actually implement this project, or how are we going to actually implement this program? What is it going to look like on the day-to-day if it's a program? What is it going to look like through planning, construction, development? What's the end project product going to look like? The evaluation we talked about extensively, that is how you measure your accomplishment, how you measure that your program has been a success, and how you're going to be reporting that back to your granting agency. The timeline you want to show from the start of the performance period for the grant. So typically that is from when you get the money awarded until the end of their allowable time frame, or the end of the timeline that you need to get it accomplished if it fits within that time frame that's allowed. So if you need 1 year, you start with the day you get awarded the grant. If you need to do more planning, make sure you put that a couple months for planning in there. Make sure that you go all the way through, show all of the different activities, and when you're going to start, when are you going to do the reporting? So let's say it takes you a year to do the project, and then you're going to do the reporting 3 months after that ends. So make sure all of that is included in that timeline. Credentials is talking about, your experience, your expertise. Do you have the people that it takes to be able to implement a successful program? In some cases, this looks like resumes. In some cases, it just looks like a summary of what kind of personnel you have. And in some cases, it's not really there. But you want to always fold in, like, we know how to, what is it that you know how to do? We know how to run a program, a sports program, or we have done after school programs in other areas and we need to do sports now. And we're going to also bring in this person who is a coach. So talk about the people that are needed to make this work. And then just a little plug, we have 26 writers now, and that's what we do. We write grants at various levels, and we have a lot of experience. We've learned a lot of things from each other, so that we don't have to make mistakes to learn them, and we already know it. You don't have to figure it out because we've been doing it already. We've talked a bit about budgets, their cost projections. You want to look at market rates. You want to look at reasonable expenses of hiring someone. So if you have to hire somebody else for your application, or you're using time, make sure that you know, what is the hourly rate going to look like? What about benefits? Are you able to capture those in your budget? If you are, spell those benefits out. It'll talk to you about that in the guidelines. But you want to make sure that you also only include allowable costs. Don't include ineligible costs. The ineligible costs will be listed in the guidelines. Sometimes there's a budget form. A lot of the times the grant has a very specific budget form that they want you to use. If they don't, I recommend just using a really clear Excel spreadsheet or other table that shows really down to the line item. We're talking like quantity and per item costs, or per hour, whatever is your unit of measurement. You want to be as specific as possible. Resolutions and authorized signatures could be a requirement. They're a requirement in a lot of grants. If you're a municipality, then you want to make sure that you leave enough time to get onto your board's agenda. That can even be something that happens, for nonprofits, for your board. How much time do you need to get that resolution in front of your board, so that they can vote and say, hey, it's okay for you to apply for this grant, and we will provide any kind of required match. And they also, so we want to, the two components of those authorized, those resolutions and authorization letters are, you have permission to apply for the grant, and we're going to provide all of the match that is provided in here. And sometimes you also have to provide a letter of commitment about that match, or other ways to prove that you have the funds to do that. So after you've submitted the application and there's a determination of if you've gotten an award or not, a lot of the time you can actually get your scoring back, and where they talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the various parts of your application. This can help you to strengthen your project or program. It can also help you to strengthen your writing. And it's usually a very good idea to go ahead and request that feedback at the time that that the award is made, and utilize that to make you stronger. I think we talked extensively about grant reporting, and I think I'm over my time. So I'm going to open up now to questions. And Shasta, do you want to lead us on that? or I can look here. I see that we had a question in the chat about costs. We can certainly talk about the cost of services if you contact California Consulting. I think I had our contact,
Ashley,
right, Steve? I might share the
yes.
screen again.
Our contact information, we're online, California, www.californiaconsulting.org, or 323-728-9002 is our El Segundo headquarters. That's our state headquarters. I also saw a question on the chat, Ashley, regarding a topic I was going to bring up. So it's perfect. Someone asked, how long or short does it take to write a grant? I was going to raise that. So a federal grant that one of our senior, directors, Ashley, Danielle, David Marquez, one of our top grant writers are writing, it's a 90-day process. Sometimes it could be a 120-day process. We recently wrote a major federal grant for a college in Los Angeles, a major college that everyone on this call, I'm sure, will have heard of in LA. We had 60 days to write it. It was crunch time to write it in 60 days because it was so large. On the other hand, I'm talking about, major grants. On the other hand, as Ashley and her team will probably tell you, not all grants take 90 or 100 days to write. There are applications we've written in 30 days. If it's an application that we know, we've written it, every year for the last 16 years, and we know it backwards and forwards. It's not going to take our grant writers 120 days to write it. So the question was, what's the shortest time it takes to write an application? What's the longest time? I would answer it by saying shortest time is probably, I've seen us do applications in 2 or 3 weeks, but that's rare. And then longest time, I would say 4 months. Ashley, what are your thoughts on that question?
I wrote a grant, a week once.
That's you, Ashley.
Do not recommend that.
That's you.
And then I think there's one where I was more thoroughly involved in the beginning stages, like the planning, and we knew it was coming about a year in advance. And so there is one that I was working on for about a year, but it wasn't really intensive until later. It was just really like finding the partnerships, getting some preliminary designs, taking care of the environmental compliance. So it was a much bigger, more complex project, and one of those 150 pagers. So and it was not CEQA categorically exempt. So, I had worked on that one for about a year.
Had CEQA in, and I know you've done a lot with greenhouse gas emission reduction calculations, which are very complex and time consuming as well. I want to mention the FEMA grant, Ashley. I didn't mention the FEMA COVID-19 grant. I see some interest in COVID-19 in the chat room and also leading up to this call. We didn't talk at all about COVID-19. We probably need to do that real quickly. There are a number of grant opportunities available under CARES Act federally for COVID-19. Also, Cal OES has opportunities for COVID-19 as well. There are several, at least 3, maybe 4 I can think of off the top of my head. I'll just mention one. There's a FEMA grant that's passed through to Cal OES at the state level that reimburses cities, school districts, universities, community colleges, community services district, park districts, basically any governmental agency for COVID-19 expenses, gloves, hand sanitizing stations, other, janitorial, cleaning services. There are some exceptions, so I don't want to make a blanket statement that all of your COVID-19 expenses will be reimbursed. It's a rather difficult and cumbersome process to identify what exactly is eligible for reimbursement and what's not. But generally speaking, that's a really good grant, and we've done several of those. It's not really a grant; it's more of a reimbursement process, I would call it, on COVID. So I know COVID's on everybody's mind right now, rightly so. Ashley, anything you'd like to add on that?
No, I think you covered that one, the FEMA, pretty well. You'll find it through Cal OES, and we can also help with that. That one, it's almost like the post-award compliance is right up front in the grant. You show this is what we spent here are our invoices, and we'd like to get some help paying back for it. 75% of the expenses are eligible to be reimbursed. So that 25% would just not be reimbursed is how that works. So let's say you spent $100 on gloves, you'll get 75 back from Cal OES, from FEMA via Cal OES if you are eligible. So I saw in the chat, there was a question about if you need an EIN done, SAMs, before you even start looking for grants. I would say it depends. So you definitely want to have an EIN for any type of grant. If you're a nonprofit and you don't have a 501c3 status yet, but you're eligible for that, make sure that you're in the process of obtaining that 501c3. You can, however, apply for some grants that don't require the 501c3 documentation. Just don't say that you have 501c3 if you don't have it. But you will need to have some kind of EIN, for reporting purposes, tax purposes, whether that's for your own. In some circumstances, you can apply with your own social security number, but you want to be very cautious with that. I would recommend getting a taxpayer ID number, which is also called an EIN. You can get that in a day, I think, or maybe it was a couple of weeks. I'm trying to remember how long it took for an organization I helped with that. It's pretty quick to get the EIN number. But the other ones, SAMs, DUNS, those are actually really only necessary for federal funding. I do recommend being grant ready. Go ahead and start that process so you already have it. But you can go ahead and start looking for, especially smaller local foundations. You can start soliciting assistance from nearby companies that, maybe they want to help you with some fundraising or pitch in just a little bit for an event, an online event perhaps that you want to do. So go ahead and start doing that while you pursue that EIN, and then get the SAMs and DUNS underway, but you can go ahead and start looking for the grants too. Most of the grants, you're going to need probably 2 to 3 months to start writing those grants anyway. So go ahead and start that SAMs and DUNS process and look for grants right away. I see a question, what are some grants that fund professional development for teachers other than the California Humanities grants, specifically for arts organizations and districts working together with teaching artists to present, and also for distance online learning. So I think does the NEA have teaching development grants? I think they might. There's also distance learning assistance through the USDA that the bulk of, at least the bulk of the USDA grant, however, for their distance learning is going to be for technology or broadband. But I think that they include some development that's allowed for teaching to distance learning, which of course we all know the online and distance learning is quite a bit different than an in-person instruction. Some other I'm not sure about the other funding, but we can certainly look out for those and search we have this vast listing of open grants right now. So if you'll contact California Consulting, we have let me share.
Yeah, our education grants list, Ashley, is what came to mind when I saw that question.
Yeah.
Because our education grant list is quite extensive. It's detailed and it's full right now. There are a lot of grant opportunities available for school districts, more than I would think given this pandemic.
And I will say also on professional development, that's almost always an option in and also an excellent component to include in a lot of different grants. And so there may not necessarily be anything open right now that's very specific to professional development, although I'm guessing there probably is. But you mentioned, going into the humanities. you look for grants that allow that are focused on humanities, and if they're education grants, they're going to probably include the opportunity to fund professional development in that area. Same thing for specialized secondary programs, like if you were going to start a new CTE, a career pathway at your high school, there's going to be professional development opportunities aligned with that new pathway that you'd be creating. So not sure if that's exactly what you were asking for, but that is something good to keep in mind as far as like professional development.
Yeah, that specialized secondary grant's out right now. It's a great grant. We write it every year, and very, very fantastic grant for school districts. I see a question about MOU. MOU is Memorandum of Understanding, and that's a partnership between, could be between a city and a school district, could be between a nonprofit and a city. Ashley, you do a lot of MOUs. The question is, what is an MOU?
It just stands for Memorandum of Understanding, like you mentioned. It's essentially a letter, but instead of being formatted like a letter, it's more like a contract. So it's not, it's something you would sign usually that defines your relationship. So who are the parties? What's the term of the agreement? And it's not so much a contract because, otherwise it would be called a contract. It's a memorandum of understanding. Like, I have this intent to perform these services, but I'm not signing into an actual legal contract. Now, I'm not a lawyer. This is not my legal definition, but that's kind of how I think of it, as like a precursor to a contract. We're not in a contract, but I intend to act like I'm in a contract.
Also, I just read a question. What are the grant directories, non-federal, so other than grants.gov, what are the grant directories, 2 grant directories we recommend? We subscribe to several. They're paid in most cases, I think in every case. I don't know if we really recommend any over or one over another. What do you think, Ashley?
Well, I like Grant Station.
Okay, there you go. We do recommend one.
That's one I like. And then there's actually a free one for foundations that I really like. Although I haven't been on it for a little while. I think it's called Philanthropy Today, which is a database within also kind of a newsletter about philanthropy, and that's a good way to find a lot of private money.
Yeah, our grant writers give me, I'm sure they do to you too, positive feedback, Ash, about Foundation Directory.
Yes.
And I know there's a cost to that. I don't think it's too exorbitant, but it is not free.
Right.
It is a subscription service, but I hear positive things back from some of our team members about Foundation Directory.
Okay. I see a question about, do you need to be a grant writer to write a grant? No. You do not need to be. And we have seen staff members at nonprofits do very well. It really just depends on, I'm going to say, kind of the skill set of your staff member that's writing it, the support that you have. It really kind of takes a team to write a grant, unless you have a very small organization and you kind of wear a lot of hats. But whomever it is that's doing the writing needs to know what's going along, they need to know basically everything about the project, and they need to be able to answer all of the very detailed questions and do it well. So no, you do not have to be a grant writer to write a grant, and smaller grants especially do very well. I've seen some individuals at cities and at foundation, like a foundation that grants other grants, that have done extremely well. And I worked with them on grants, and we usually are very successful. And then they work sometimes on their own on grants with some success, and then we could help administrate those grants. And so I'll tell you, it sounds pretty simple and direct, and it works for some people and it doesn't work for others. So I recommend that if you are going to try to have a staff member at a nonprofit do it, number one, you allow them enough time to do it. It's going to take a lot of time. You sometimes spend 40 or 80 hours on a grant. If it's a small grant, 10 might be able to do it, but make sure that you allow enough time and don't wait for the last minute. That way, if you get started and you realize this is so overwhelming, you've got time to ask for help. from a professional, because I've had, my brother wanted to help me write grants. He wanted to write with us, and I was trying to show him. It was very overwhelming to him. And I thought he was going to do very well, but he just really wasn't. So it wasn't a fit for him. So if you are a small nonprofit and you want to try writing on your own, just give yourself enough time so that if you aren't getting it, like if your normal day-to-day activities are taking over, or it's just not something that comes easily, but the grant is super important to the success of your venture, that you have enough time to reach out for a professional grant writer.
I would also add to that, Ashley, it depends on the grant. So generally speaking, I agree with you. You don't have to be a grant writer. On the other hand, if you've never written an EDA application before, and you're going for a $20 million EDA grant, I don't recommend it. I would definitely yeah. That's not one to learn, kind of learn by going, or trial by error, or whatever the
Right.
trial by fire, whatever the right saying is. You want to have a professional grant writer. If you're writing 150 page EDA federal application, you're asking for 10 million, 50 million, 20 million. You've never written an EDA before, which 99% of people, even grant writers that I interview all the time, if almost none of them have written EDAs. Not one you want to. That's not one you want to do on your own. If it's a $10,000 target grant, and as Ashley said, it's going to take 10 hours, by all means, absolutely. You probably should not be hiring a professional grant writing company to write that. But the Prop 68 that's coming up, that's due in December, that's $8.5 million for Parks and Rec. I can tell you, our phone started ringing off the hook in January, and the grant is due December 14th. So people were calling us 11 months before the grant was due, saying, we need your help. Can we hire you? It's just a massive application. It requires 5 community meetings, and that's just one component. So that's 5 meetings, 5 agendas, 5 minutes of the meetings, notices of the meetings, how many people attended, what did they say? That's one component of the application. So depends on the application is what I would say.
Right. I see just a couple quick questions, and then I actually am going to have to sign off, but I'll leave Steve to answer any of your other remaining straightforward questions. And then he can get in touch with me if you have any more complicated ones. I see that there a question about fiscal sponsorships. Some fiscal sponsorships do go through this process. In most cases, it's really going to be more about building a direct relationship with those fiscal sponsors, especially if they're local. Look to your local organizations first, and then go out after those larger ones that are a little more distant from you. And those fiscal sponsorships, like I said, just go to their website for someone that you're interested in having sponsor you, and they'll tell you if there's an application for them to fiscally sponsor something. Like a Walmart community grant, could be a local one. There's a very, very short application there that you could fill out. That's a great one to get your feet wet on, because it's super small and you could get up to $5,000. Now you want to do that early in the year, but usually between February and July, and apply to the ones that are around you, the closest ones to you. The same kind of goes for other fiscal sponsorship. How likely is it to receive a grant if you're a newer nonprofit with very little capital? Again, that kind of depends on the grant. You might be able to get one of those huge grants, but it's best to look out for the smaller, easier kind of private foundation grants or local grants, so that you start building what we say capacity. So you want to build your capacity to be able to attract those other grants in the future. That means your expertise in administering a grant, like I said, delivering the grant on time within your budget, reporting back the responses, and just making sure that you have delivered a grant. Once you've successfully delivered some grants, then the other grants are going to come more easily to you. So with that, I want to just thank you all for coming, and I'm going to turn it back over to Joseph for closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Ashley. Again, very informative. We really appreciated having the walkthrough of everything going on there, and Steve as well. As Shasta has mentioned in our chat there, all of the information found in those PowerPoints will be available along with the recording of this session. So we are really happy to be involved. I would like to kick it over to Jessica in order to show a closing video in which has been recorded by Supervisor Chaffee. But again, our office is very thankful. And if there's anything that the Office of Assemblywoman Sharon Quirk Silva can do for you, please don't be afraid to reach out. Our number is 714-525-6515. And so Jessica.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm going to go ahead and share our remarks.
Thank you to Steve and Ashley from California Consulting for your thoughtful presentations today. And thank you to Assemblymember Sharon Quirk Silva for co-hosting our second annual grants workshop. I also want to thank you for giving us your time today. Hope the information you learned today will help you take advantage of available COVID-19 grant writing opportunities and attain your grant funding goals.
Thank you. And if you have any questions for Supervisor Chaffee, our office number is 714-834-3440. Thank you, and thank you to California Consulting.